In today's video, I'll be sharing my top 25 favorite roller coasters I've ridden. Hello coaster lovers. So 2024 is coming to a close, and that's actually a wild phrase to say. This year flew by and it was action-packed, but it delivered. So you know what that means. It's time to reveal my top 25. I got to ride 11 new coaster credits this year, and 6 of those were good enough to crack my top 25, so that means 6 others had to get booted from last year. So I'll highlight those real quick. And those coasters are Tornado at Stricker's Grove, Space Mountain at Magic Kingdom, Magnum SL 200 at Cedar Point, The Bat at Kings Island, Scorpion at Busch Gardens Tampa, and Sheikar also at Busch Gardens Tampa. So all those have sadly bumped off my top 25. So before we start the list, here are some metrics. So 13 B&Ms have made my top 25, which is more than half the list. Then there are 3 Intamins and RMCs, and then 2 GCIs, and then some extras like 1 Premier and 1 Vekoma. In my opinion, it's constantly changing. This wasn't the same list I had a week ago, but this is the list I came up with. So number 25, we have Kumba at Busch Gardens Tampa. This is Busch Gardens Tampa's old school B&M looper, and it's a good coaster if you can look past the nasty B&M rattle. The zero G roll is violent, and the double corkscrews have some whip to it. The layout is pretty good, and I also like how it uses a bit of the terrain to its advantage. But it's near impossible for me to look past the rattle on Kumba. The rattle just ruins the whole experience, for me at least, but it had to take a spot on my list because it's so iconic and everybody loves it. At number 24, this coaster has been slept on, but I don't get it, and I'm talking about Valraven at Cedar Point. This is my favorite dive coaster. The first drop has barely any float, but the free fall sensation is cool. The Illman and dive loop are good inversions, but they're not as good as the final inversion. That final zero G roll has incredible hang time, and with the ride having a smooth but not glossy smooth track, it makes it a great coaster to ride when you're at Cedar Point. The vests though are not ideal. It would have been nice if they added the B&M over the shoulder restraints. Overall, it's pretty solid. For number 23, this is my favorite indoor coaster for right now, and it's with Rock and Roller Coaster. This is the lone Vekoma coaster in my top 25, and it's a good one. The launch has some great pull, and the seat swiper roll is weird but it's pretty cool. The theming is great as well. I like how you go through the Hollywood sign. The corkscrew towards the end is a good inversion to round out the layout, and I see why so many kids love this coaster. It's my favorite coaster at the Disney World Resort when this video is released, but I have no idea when I'm going to experience Guardians or Tron, but I'm still doing good at avoiding spoilers for both rides. So number 22, let's go back to Busch Gardens Tampa for Cheetah Hunt. My first coaster credit of the year was Cheetah Hunt, and if you're curious, the last credit of the year for me was Penguin Trek. But back to Cheetah Hunt, this coaster doesn't get talked about a lot. People always talk about Iron Gwazi and Montu, but Cheetah Hunt is fun too. The drop off the Windcatcher Tower has great airtime, and there are some other great pops of airtime during the ride too. The Hardline Roll has good hang time too, but I have no idea when I'm going back to Busch Gardens since I switched my pass from Busch Gardens Tampa to SeaWorld Orlando. And speaking of SeaWorld Orlando, barely making the top 20 is Icebreaker. The first SeaWorld coaster in my top 25 is Icebreaker. I sadly only got one ride on this coaster when this video is released, but I had fun on it, and it was in the back row, which was appreciated. The top hat had some good full ejector airtime, and it had more airtime pops than I was expecting. The spike was fun too, along with the turnaround and wave turn, so the layout is great. I also appreciate that they took off the comfort collars. They are very unnecessary, so bravo SeaWorld for doing the right choice. Breaking into the top 20 is the legendary Beast at Kings Island. This is not my favorite wooden coaster. It gets rougher every year, but I do have a low tolerance for rough wooden coasters, so I'm a little unforgivable when it comes to those type of rides, but the Beast has some fun moments, especially the tunnels and that one-of-a-kind double helix. It is plain chaos when you're experiencing the double helix on the Beast, and it's far from smooth. The layout for the coaster is bizarre since it spans over 35 acres of land, and it does hug the terrain most of the time. At number 19, this is still one of the most underrated coasters that I've ridden. It's Wild Eagle over at Dollywood. The reason why this is underrated is because I'm a hang time type of person, and this coaster has a lot of it, and the forces were unexpected. Like, the positives were stronger than I was expecting. The layout is a little bit lacking, but I say it's pretty good. The 4 inversions all have great hang time. The best one is being the zero G roll, but the vertical loop has a good mix of positives and hang time, and the train design is a work of art too. This coaster was easily a winner during my Dollywood trip last year in spring break of 2023. So for number 18, this is another coaster that I've only ridden one time for right now, and it's Kraken at SeaWorld Orlando. This is the second floorless coaster I've ridden, and it's a good time. It has a shake to it, but it's paired up with a great use of elements. The vertical loop is like Wild Eagle's loop, where it combines positives and hang time very well. The zero G roll is not as wild as Kuma's roll, but it's solid, and the trenches in the second half are very good too. I also like the corkscrew and vertical loop at the end. It is snappy. And if you're going to SeaWorld with Quick Queue, rows 2 and 7 are the only Quick Queue rows you can ride the coaster in, so it's pretty much towards the front or towards the back. I got row 7 and I liked it. And speaking of B&M loopers, the next coaster keeps dropping and dropping, but I still love this coaster. It's Banshee at Kings Island. This B&M invert is pretty much the reason why I have this hobby of being a coaster enthusiast, and it's a fun invert too, but this is my least favorite out of the 3 inverts I've been on, but that's not saying much. The layout is very reminiscent of a wing coaster because it's so graceful, but it does have good elements. I did grow up with this ride, so it did feel weird experiencing the other 2 inverts where they're snappy and slaps you in the face with positives, but we'll talk about those 2 inverts later. Just like Valraven, the vest restraints are also not ideal. They really crush your torque torso on the final brake run, but I'm a fan of this coaster, and I'm really glad I faced my fears on this coaster. So for number 16, this coaster is also an underrated ride just like Wild Eagle, and it's Gatekeeper at Cedar Point. This wing coaster has forever changed the skyline for Cedar Point, but at least the coaster is pretty good. The wing over drop is unique, and I like the layout, but if they replace that helix at the end with something else, it might jump up a couple spots. Like I said earlier, I am really into hang time, and this is one of the coasters that I think of when the topic is hang time. The color scheme also works well into the skyline. It's one of the most beautiful coasters I know, and maybe ever. I'm definitely giving this coaster a couple more rides next time I go to Cedar Point, but it barely made the top 15, so what coasters did make it? One of them is the best aero coaster I've ridden, Tennessee Tornado at Dollywood. This coaster is short, but it's so action-packed. The first loop does have hang time, so that's a winner, and the two inversions afterwards have very strong positive Gs. The layout isn't much in terms of length, but this is the third best coaster here at Dollywood behind Thunderhead and Lightning Rod, but we will hit those two rides later. Overall, it's a fantastic ride. For number 14, this coaster surprised me. It's Pipeline the Surf Coaster at SeaWorld Orlando. This is the one and only B&M surf coaster, and it's really fun. It's so cool lifting off the board while getting airtime, and you can even hear on how shocked I was in this little clip. And as you can see, this coaster was a lot of fun. I do wish I got more rides in, but 2 rides is better than 1. But I did ride this coaster in the second to front and second to back, and it's definitely a back row ride for sure. You get more powerful airtime back there. The vest restraints do put some pressure around your collarbone, but if you can look past that, this is an incredible ride. I cannot wait to get more rides on this coaster next time I go to SeaWorld Orlando. And speaking of me being shocked of B&Ms at SeaWorld, the next coaster we got is Manta, my first B&M flyer. My expectations for Manta were blown out of the water. I did not expect this coaster to be so cool. Experiencing that sensation of flight over the pathways and Penguin Trek was so cool. I also like the turn over the water right here, but unlike the past coasters with vests, the vests on Manta don't bother me. It keeps you snug and I say it's comfortable. The layout is decent and it's glossy smooth, so that's a winner for me. And the pretzel loop was insane. You're shoved in the back of your seat and it's a lot to handle. And speaking of forceful B&Ms, that will lead us into my used to be favorite invert. It is Raptor at Cedar Point. This invert is a lot to handle, because the inversions are so snappy. The corkscrews at the end are a great example. I also like the zero G-roll snappiness too. The layout is great, and hearing the rides roar from the midway just hypes you up for your day. And just like Gatekeeper, the color scheme pops in the skyline. There are really no complaints besides that unnecessary head jolt at the very end. But overall, I love this ride. I cannot wait to get more rides on this next time. But what I consider a better version of Raptor is this little coaster called Montu, which has been recently bugged out of my top 10. If you're talking about B&M inverts, Montu is on top, because the elements never stop coming. And you also cannot talk about Montu without mentioning the Batwing. That is easily one of the most intense inversions I have ever experienced. I also love how the second half uses the trenches to its advantage. It feels like your legs are going to be chopped off any second, and the inversions in the trenches are snappy too, such as the corkscrew. That's one of the best elements on the ride, and just like I said in the cheetah hunt portion, I have no idea when I'm going back to Busch Gardens, but next time I go, I'll get a couple more laps on this coaster. But I do have a lot of rides currently. I think it's at 5 or 6 rides, but I do miss this coaster. But what breaks into my top 10? This might bring up some debate, but Mystic Timbers is at the number 10 spot. This fast-paced GCI was dropping a few spots a couple years ago, but after my recent ride in July, this jumped up a lot of spots, and it was better than ever. The quick airtime pops are plentiful, and the tunnel is satisfying to listen to when you're on the ride. It does suck that I haven't got a true night ride yet on Mystic. The latest I rode it was at dusk, but I say dusk is close enough to a night ride, but I don't think Mystic Timbers is as good as Thunderhead, which is placed at number 9. This is the other GCI that I've experienced, and holy cow, the 3 rides I got on this thing are incredible. It was smooth, it had great pacing, and the airtime was surprising for me. It's non-stop action-packed bliss, and the station flyby is a good touch. I'm also planning to create a review for this coaster soon, so stay tuned for that. But at number 8, I'm actually pretty impressed, because Diamondback at Kings Island did not move at all. If you remember last year's list in 2023, Diamondback was placed also at number 8, so I'm pretty shocked on how it didn't move. But as for the ride, it's still kicking butt 15.5 years later. The Camelbacks have very aggressive floater airtime, and that one valley between the Hammerhead turn and trimmed Camelback still feels the same. And since the repaint is complete, it's looking better than ever. I cannot wait to get back on this soon. But at number 7, this and Diamondback are always switching spots, but I settled for Orion taking the number 7 spot. I slightly take this over Diamondback. I just think it's more fun. The 300-foot drop just lasts forever, and the elements afterwards are fun too, such as the Helix, Speed Hill, Camelback, and especially that one bank turn into the brakes. That hill just sends you up out of your seat. But this is not the best B&M I've ridden. We'll hit that up later. But before we move on, if you're enjoying this video so far, the best way you can show your support is giving the video a like, and you can subscribe if you're feeling generous. That would actually mean the world to me. But back to the list. At number 6, this will also bring up a debate, but I can't really place Millennium Force at Cedar Point lower. This was my first coaster manufactured and built by Intamin, and wow, it is so intense. The airtime hills are amazing. My memory of this coaster is starting to get blurry, but I do remember going down the first drop, and it scared the crap out of me. I felt like I was gonna dive into Lake Erie. The layout is not the best, and just like Thunderhead, I'm gonna be creating a review for this ride, specifically an updated review. The one I have right now is outdated, so stay tuned for the updated Millennium Force review. So for number 5, this is my favorite B&M coaster I've ridden, and it's Mako at SeaWorld Orlando. This coaster was a big win, and I'm so excited to come back since I have a pass to SeaWorld. The layout is great. The 5-second floater camelback felt endless. I got 5 rides on this coaster, and 4 of those were during a marathon at night, and I did get to ride the coaster with 2 other coaster enthusiasts on a couple of those rides, so shout out to them. They were cool. I can't wait to get back to SeaWorld and marathon this coaster again. So for number 4, I'm a little decisive between Mako or Lightning Rod at Dollywood. The problematic top-of-track RMC is taking the 4th spot in my top 5, and this coaster is so fun. The first time I did it, it was raining and it felt like meaty needles poking your face, but I could look past the weather on coasters. It's a powerhouse. The first drop has great flow, and the quad-down feels like it never ends. And for me, it was glass smooth, but not glossy smooth. It does suck that the launch is gone. That was a highlight of the ride, but I'm extremely thankful that I got to ride this coaster with the launch. And speaking of launches, the ride that is taking the 3rd spot in my top 25 is none other than Maverick at Cedar Point. What a ride. Where do I even begin? The second launch in the tunnel does feel like you're launching it to heaven, and the first drop at the beginning stunned me. It felt steeper than it looked. The second stangle dive had me holding onto the restraint for dear life. I was terrified at how steep it was, and just like Millennium Force, my memory of riding Maverick is starting to get blurry, but I do remember some moments. This thing is a lot to handle. Just prepare yourself before riding this coaster. But we are not going far for the number 2 coaster. It's right across the midway, and you hit up Steel Vengeance, also at Cedar Point. This used to be my number 1 a couple years ago, but this RMC is just something else. It goes on forever, and the quick airtime pops never stop coming. The stand-up moment on Steel Vengeance is easily the Outer Banks hill a few moments after the first drop. The airtime there is phenomenal, but towards the end, it does feel like it's trying to get a record, so it can be a little much if you're not prepared. I really hope I get to ride this coaster again. I only got 1 ride, but that's gonna stick with me for a while. But what takes the crown as my favorite roller coaster? No surprise, it's Iron Gwazi at Busch Gardens Tampa. Wow, no shocker here, but this and Steel Vengeance is always switching spots, but it's tilted for Iron Gwazi being number 1. The layout is more dynamic and the elements are not that repetitive, and every time I hit the brake run, I always feel like I sound like a hyena. I had so many memories in Iron Gwazi. I also did get a night ride on it, and it was a completely different beast. You should definitely get your butt down to Busch Gardens Tampa and check out this RMC masterpiece. It's worth it for the price of admission. So that is the top 25 best roller coasters I've ridden for 2024. I actually can't believe this year is almost over. It flew by so fast, but this year wasn't the best. It was kind of terrible for me mentally, but as for coasters and theme parks, it was solid. I rode 19 coasters in 2024, and they spread across Kings Island, Busch Gardens, and SeaWorld Orlando, and I made so many memories along the way. It'll be remembered for the years to come. So happy new year, and make sure to keep that adrenaline pumping, and I'll see you in 2025.